Hello. Nice to see you tonight. Hi, Dolores. Hi, Steve Gonzo. Sorry to hear about your 7-day comment ban. But by the way, Carmen is back in Facebook jail. Again, for 30 days, she says. Lana says, howdy, share to Twitter. I'm working as usual. Don't work too hard, Lana. Dolores says, hi, everyone. Joy Burgess says, shall we move to Copenhagen? It will never be better in the US of A. Wonderful, wonderful Copenhagen. Steve Gonzo says, apparently not yet. Joy Burgess Ramsey says, disappointed? Sorry to be American. Tired. We are monsters. COVID makes moving anywhere impossible. I wish we could impeach Biden, Congress, a whole lot. Me too. Bonnie says, hi, everyone. And Joy says, hello, Dr. Firestone. Well, you don't have to call me doctor. Everybody calls me Joe or Dr. Joe. Nobody calls me Dr. Firestone. I mean, that wasn't even my father. Lana says, Facebook has gotten absurd with their restrictions. Very annoying. Lana says, hello, Bonnie. Yeah, Bonnie says hello. Well, maybe time to explore other alternatives. There are other alternatives. Okay, tonight I just want to begin with a question that was taken up by Bo, the fifth column, a couple of weeks ago. He raised the question, are we taking enough immigrants? And he noted that people say everybody wants to come here. And he questioned that. He said, is that true? And he also pointed out people also say, why do we have to bear the burden, okay, of all these refugees alone? But he said he doesn't think any of that is true. He pointed out that Colombia has 51,211,717 people. Or I guess that's the precise amount. I think he said 50 million. And he said they took 1 million people last year in as refugees. And he said, we have 330 million people here in the United States. Actually, 332,182,690. And we only took in 130,000. And he pointed out that we also had 61 times their GDP. They have a GDP of 350 billion. We have a GDP of 21.5 trillion. So he pointed out there was no comparison of the generosity of the Colombian people compared to ourselves. So I thought this was really interesting, and I just wanted to comment on it by bringing up the comparable population figures. 51,211,717 for Colombia. They took in 1 million. We have 332,182,690, and we took in 130,000. They took in 2% of their population last year. We took in 0.04%, 0.04% of our population in. On a per capita basis, they took in 50 times as many people as we took in. Of course, they even beat us in absolute numbers by close to 8 times. So, are we taking enough immigrants? Considering that we're the cause of a lot of immigrants trying to leave their country, I'd say no, we're not taking in enough immigrants. Nor do I think that everybody wants to come here. Evidently, a lot of people just wanted to go to Colombia and had no desire at all to come here. Anyway, I thought that Bo made an important point, and I wanted to embellish it just a little. So now, that does take us to the topic, which is Biden back on the road to Trump? After all, he's been deporting people at roughly an Obama administration pace, faster than Trump actually deported people. He was supposed to ease off the deportations. Now, I know that the court decided that he couldn't stop the deportations, but there were things he could have done administratively to stop the deportations. For example, he could have fired a good part of ICE and a good part of the CBP. Had he done so, that would have slowed down the deportations. Once he started firing a bunch of them, I bet they would have slowed down the deportations all by themselves. I bet they would have done that. In any case, he's broken that promise, hasn't he? So let's note, first of all, a chair piece. Share a piece that appeared in Truthout today. And it's about Mitt. Romney says Trump will be GOP nominee if he runs in 2024. Actually, it's Mitt on Trump. There's a picture of Il Duce now. This one's by Chris Walker, February 24th, 2021. And Romney said it was very likely that Trump would win the nomination for president if he decided to run again in 2024. He says, I don't know if he'll run in 2024 or not, but if he does, I'm pretty sure he's going to win. Mitt said in an interview he had with the New York Times. He acknowledged a lot can happen between now and 2024, quote unquote. But he stuck to his prediction that Trump would be the nominee if he chose to run. He cited polling data, and the polling data really made it pretty clear. Trump got 54% support from Republican respondents to run for president in 2024. Okay, Mitt only got 4% in the same poll, which was a Politico Morning Consult poll. Ted Cruz got 3%, but Nikki Haley, the former UN ambassador, got 6%. And former Vice President Mike Pence received 12%. Trump got 54%. Amazing. Some have been calling for Trump to run for Congress first, saying that if he was among those who ran and won, and if Republicans won the House in 2022, Steve Bannon pointed out that Trump could convince the GOP caucus to let him become Speaker of the House as well, ousting current Speaker Nancy Pelosi from the position. Well, if that would have happened, what Trump could do is he could use his position as Speaker of the House to campaign for the presidency, and also to call for another attack and also to impeach the president. If he took over as Speaker of the House, would he impeach Biden? I mean, he might not get him convicted. I don't think he would, but he could still impeach him. And maybe he could call for a mass of people to come to the White House and protest for days on end until Biden resigned, and then continue their protest until Harris resigned. And then Trump could become the president again even before 2025. Boy, what a scenario. That's amazing. Don't you think the Democrats had better come back and use the 14th Amendment and pass a bill to give it some teeth and stop Trump from either running or serving in office right now while they still have a chance? I do. Trump could then run for president 2 years later if he still wanted to do so. And Bannon said Trump's a disruptor. Bannon also said, I believe in the marrow of my bones that he'll be our nominee in 2024. He'll come back to us. We'll have a sweeping victory in 2022, and he'll lead us in 2024. And that's really what this is all about. The sweeping victory that they may have in 2024 due to Biden, Pelosi, and Schumer and other Democrats already preparing the way for them to have that kind of a victory. So how are they preparing the way? Well, everybody can see it already. Can see how they're preparing the way. But let's move to another piece. This one appeared in Mint Press News not too long ago, I think February 19th. I've been meaning to get to it, but never did. Sorry, I think I got the wrong thing up here. That was not the piece that I intended to have up. So excuse me for just a moment while I pull that piece up. That should be it. I had the wrong piece staged. Okay. So now you should be seeing it. Yes. Biden's first month marked by broken promises. And Alan McLeod of MintPress News is characterizing Biden as Trump light. 1 month into his presidential career, and Biden has already left a trail of broken promises. Yesterday, it was reported that the president held a closed-door meeting with a group of mayors and governors. At the first sign of pushback from Republicans in the room, he immediately dropped his support for the $15 an hour wage on the basis that he needed bipartisan support to pass it. Given that Democrats control the House, Senate, and the White House, this position seems surprising. Quote, I really want this in there, but it just doesn't look like we can do it because of reconciliation, unquote. The 78-year-old Delawarean said, Delawarean, according to those president, quote, right now we have to prepare for this not making it, unquote, he added. As Politico noted, there was no further negotiation on the minimum wage after that. The topic was simply dropped. Well, I wasn't aware that meeting was a negotiation, were you? The president's professed desire to end the war in Yemen has also been liberally watered down. In his statement, Biden stressed that support for Saudi, quote, defensive, unquote, operations would continue and that only, quote, relevant, unquote, arms sales would be stopped. This was essentially a return to the Obama-era position on Yemen. Oh, I would say that's another broken promise. Yesterday, Secretary of Defense Lloyd J. Austin spoke with Saudi Defense Minister and assured him of the United States' continued commitment to their partnership. Austin went on to publicly condemn the alleged Houthi attacks in Saudi Arabia, reiterating the U.S. would help Riyadh defend its borders. Consequently, the worry is that the Saudi onslaught will merely be reframed as a defensive campaign, and business will continue as usual. On Iran, the president has declared that Trump-era sanctions will not be lifted, something that Iran considers a prerequisite for any negotiations on a new nuclear deal. Student debt is a major problem in all 50 states, as you know, 1.7 trillion now. Biden's defying many powerful Democrats, including the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, in categorically rejecting a proposed debt forgiveness program of up to $50,000 per person. I'm prepared to write off a $10,000 debt, but not 50, Biden said to a CNN town hall on Tuesday, insisting that he does not have the authority to do so, something strongly contested by many experts. This will no doubt disappoint 44.7 million student loan borrowers who owe an average of around $32,000 each. Then on Wednesday, White House officials walked back even the $10,000 figure, suggesting the president would not do this through executive action, but instead go into negotiations with Republicans with this as his first offer. Okay, so you know what I think the Democrats should do? What I think Schumer should do? I think Schumer should hold hostage all the rest of Biden's appointments to the cabinet until he cancels all of the student debt. We know he has the authority. What's to prevent Chuck Schumer from holding all Biden's appointments hostage? He can even run on that when he runs next year. He can run on student debt forgiveness. Want to bet Biden caves? I'm willing to place a bet that if Schumer does that, Biden caves. Schumer can do that. Worse still, on Wednesday, White House, I went through that already. There was one area many were confident Biden would be radically different from Trump. It was immigration. However, the administration issued new guidelines for ICE yesterday that made clear the president has jettisoned his previous commitments to halting deportations. News was met with dismay from the American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU, which stated that it represented, quote, a disappointing step backward from the Biden administration's earlier commitments to fully break from the harmful deportation policies of both the Trump and Obama presidency. Earlier this month, ICE deported 72 people, including 20 children, as young as 6 months old, to protest Iraq, Haiti. So look, this is obviously leading Democrats down the path to defeat. Even Schumer might be defeated, not because the Democrats are going to lose New York, but if Schumer doesn't get it done and a lot more, Ocasio-Cortez can beat him in New York. She can beat him in New York. And she might decide to run. After all, she's not getting anything done in the House. Not with Nancy Pelosi there. Maybe she can get more done in the Senate by holding Biden hostage herself. I mean, evidently, if you hold things Biden wants hostage, then he's unable to do anything about it, right? And a little picture of kids in cages and the caption, from concentration camps to overflow facilities. With Biden in charge, the media forgets kids in cages. The media. It's all about the media. Picking a few easy battles. All this comes on the heels of the stimulus check debate, where, as you know, $2,000 checks were promised immediately upon a Democratic victory, but that now is turned into a means-tested $1,400 check, which is still yet to be agreed upon, with payments not expected until mid-March at the earliest. Look, let's be realistic. It's not going to pass until mid-March at the earliest. When they'll get the checks out is another question. That's another question. The former VP has followed through on a number of promises to rein in the worst of the Trump administration, including rejoining the World Health Organization and rescinding bans on Muslims and on transgender military service. However, those measures aren't going to be enough for most Americans. Biden began his campaign for the Democratic presidential nomination in June 2019 at a Manhattan hotel, telling wealthy donors that, quote, nothing would fundamentally change under his presidency. After 1 month in office, it appears as if that is one campaign promise he is likely to keep. Well, let's talk about some other campaign promises now. Like the $15 an hour minimum wage. Like that, right? What about that $15 an hour minimum wage? Well, as you all know, there is a little problem from West Virginia called Joe Manchin, and another one from Arizona called Kyrsten Sinema. By the way, Joe Manchin decided he was going to support by Deborah Haaland after all, and so it looks like now she's going to be confirmed, because it looks like all 50 Democratic votes at least will be for her. Whether any Republicans will come over and vote for her, we don't know. That remains to be seen. But getting back to the mini wage, in what universe is a $15 wage, quote, too high, unquote? Joe Manchin's. It's the title of the article. And there is a picture of Joe Manchin, I have to say, looking slightly cross-eyed and not a little bit stupid. It was an unfortunate photo they decided to feature. This article by Barbara Keppel at Truthout. From today, economic justice organizers may soon triumph in their fight for a $15 an hour minimum wage. Thanks to their years of effort, President Biden vowed to hike the minimum wage, and every Democratic contender during the primary debate, by the way, to $15 an hour. In keeping with that promise, Biden attached a wage bill to his $1.9 trillion COVID relief package. Well, last I looked, I didn't see that he attached it. What I saw was that Nancy Pelosi attached it to the reconciliation bill, as did Bernie Sanders when it came out of committee. Biden did say he was for it, but he did not attach it. Although Republicans and their political allies are firmly opposed to the measure, the Senate could approve it, but Dem holdouts like West Virginia Joe Manchin could doom it, since he says $15 is too high for West Virginians. By the way, that's, as you know, $15 in 2025. It's not $15 now in 2021. It would only be $9.50 or so in 2021, if I have the figure right. As almost a fifth of West Virginians live in poverty, a reasonable question would be, for whom is $15 too high? And another reasonable question would be, why isn't it $24 an hour? If the minimum wage had kept pace with productivity increases, it would be $24 an hour. What's wrong with the $24 an hour minimum wage bill?
It's only 12 years.
This debate, Bonnie points out it's only 12 years since the last hike of the minimum wage to the princely sum of $7.25 an hour, which nobody can live on anymore in any city of the United States, according to all the cost of living measures. This debate is not new. Since the early 1900s, businesses have balked at a livable minimum wage, while most others approve of it. According to recent polls, 75% of Americans want the minimum wage raised to $15. Even during the Great Depression, President Franklin Roosevelt struggled for 6 years before he convinced Congress to pass the Fair Labor Standards Act in 1938, which set the federal minimum at 25 cents an hour and 40 cents by 1940. Wow. Furious at the Supreme Court and business interests for demolishing labor-friendly laws, FDR cautioned America to, quote, not let any calamity-howling executive with an income of $1,000 a day tell you that a wage of $11 a week is going to have a disastrous effect on all American industry, unquote. 80 years later, as of 2019, 34 million Americans still live at, under, or just above the poverty line. Nearly half of workers earn under $15 an hour, and the federal minimum, $7.25 an hour, hasn't budged since 2009. For its part, the mainstream press isn't helping. On February 11th, a Washington Post editorial warned that, quote, Democrats must listen to the data, unquote. We are. The data say $7.25 an hour, and they say people can't live on that. And they say that in many parts of the United States, people can't live on even $15 an hour. So we are listening to the data. And the data says, raise the frickin' mini wage. Claiming that, quote, objective economic research should convince Congress to proceed with caution. I hate to tell you, but there's never anything objective about economic research in the sense that it has no bias. Biases creep in. They creep in through selection of the categories. They creep in through selection of the evidence. They creep in the very decision made to accept a hypothesis. Biases creep in for all sorts, of reasons. The research isn't bias-free. It may be objective in the sense that we can share it among ourselves and we can all criticize it. And that's what it's for us to criticize and find flaws in it. But the data is never by itself objective. It is always framed. It is always within some frame. And the frame of the Washington Post is, be very, very afraid of inflation. Be very, very afraid of people earning a living wage all over the country in the United States, because that's going to cause inflation. That's the frame of the Washington Post. Why? Because all of its reporters are millionaires. They're all millionaires. All the owners are 100 millionaires. And one of the owners is the richest man in the world. So another question is, whose data? That is another question. Remember, I talked about selecting the data for nearly 30 years. Scores of scholars have reported on wage hikes' positive effects. They pull the poor out of poverty and stimulate the economy by putting more cash in low-paid workers' pockets, which they spend, boosting business receipts and raising tax revenues at all government levels. But the Washington Post has fallen into FDR's, quote, calamity, unquote, camp, citing the supposedly nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, CBO, data. It is nonpartisan in the sense that it's not in favor of the Republican Party. It's not in favor of the Democratic Party. It's just in favor of the austerity party, which is run by the Washington Post and the New York Times and the media. The austerity party, which controls, which has the bird of austerity, has two wings. It has the Democratic bird and the Democratic wing and the Republican wing, the left wing and the right wing. But it's still the austerity bird. And it's not left wing on anything economics. It's only left wing on identity politics. But it's the austerity bird. We should give the Washington Post the austerity bird ourselves. Stop buying that newspaper. Stop watching their videos. On the plus side, in its latest report, February 2021, the CBO predicted that 27 million workers' earnings would rise with a $15 an hour minimum wage by 2025, lifting 900,000 Americans out of poverty. But it warned that, quote, 1.4 million mostly young, low-skilled workers would drop out of the labor force, unquote. Equally grim, it claimed the federal deficit will soar by $54 billion over 10 years. Folks, $54 billion over 10 years is only $5.4 billion per year. The federal deficit right now, this year, is probably going to run $1.4, $1.5 trillion. Do you know what percentage 5.4 billion is out of 1.5 trillion? I'll leave that to you to calculate. It's a very low percentage because 1% is 150 billion. It's very, very low. It's a fraction of 1%. We should be afraid, very afraid. What's little known is that the CBO doesn't carry out its own studies and instead relies on others. And here's the rub. According to Michael Reich, an economics professor at University of California, Berkeley, the CBO mainly looked at studies that found negative effects. Even worse, it kept spiking the damage. Since its 2019 report said 1.1 million jobs would be lost, 300,000 fewer than its latest estimate. Where did it get that increase from? A very dark place. I'll leave it to your imagination to figure out where. Reich says the CBO based many of its figures on a University of Washington study, which found significant negative effects from Seattle's 2014 minimum wage hike. However, the researchers redid the study in 2019 and found the effects were far smaller. But the CBO ignored the correction. The CBO selected the data. You remember what I said about selecting the data? They took the earlier data because they didn't want to have to say that it wasn't a $54 billion deficit, but a much smaller deficit. The CBO ignored the correction, and the Post did not alter its advice. Of course, the Bezos might be angry if they altered their advice, especially since the rise in the minimum wage in Seattle gored Bezos's ox, didn't it? His ox got gored, citing his own research and studies from the Economic Policy Institute. Bezos should have been prevented from buying the Washington Post. I know this is off topic. I won't spend much time on it. But it should be illegal for tycoons in other areas who have huge amounts of money and much to gain. It should be illegal for them to buy major newspapers. They should have to start their own newspaper and build it up from scratch. Citing his own research and studies from the Economic Policy Institute, Reich testified to Congress in 2019 that the $15 an hour wage would positively affect 32 million American workers. Also, he notes that while opponents claim that restaurants will have to raise prices and thus lose business, research shows that sales do not drop. The finding is based on a study of 27 metro areas by two researchers at the Federal Reserve Bank in Boston and an MIT economist, he says. As to the deficit ballooning, Rice says the opposite is true. The hike will add $65 billion in revenues a year from low-wage workers, payroll, and income taxes. He adds that Arindrajit Dubey, an economist at the University of Massachusetts, Amherst, who, by the way, was one of those who did much to tank the Reinhardt and Rogoff research, found that it will reduce government spending on food stamps, as well as the child and earned income tax credits, since more workers will be able to afford their groceries. Won't it be wonderful? The first study on minimum wage hikes was done in 1992 when Princeton economists David Card and Alan Krueger, look, if I'm not mistaken, wasn't Alan Krueger for a while one of the advisors to Barack Obama, looked at fast food restaurant jobs after New Jersey raised its hourly minimum wage from $4.25 to $5.05 and Pennsylvania did not. Opponents warn that New Jersey customers would take their business to Pennsylvania and they need to cut their employees. But based on the Economist study of 410 restaurants, neither happened. We find no indications that the rise of the minimum wage reduced employment. Reich adds that, quote, many economists find that hikes to the minimum wage are fully passed on to restaurant customers and thus do not decrease the profits or sales. But the National Restaurant Association still remains opposed to minimum wages, although retailers like Amazon and Costco advocate increasing them. Today, 66,000 West Virginians earn less than minimum wage. 16% live out or under the poverty line, which is $24,000 for a family of four. And the poverty rate for Black people in the state was 28.6% in 2018. One could infer Senator Manchin means a $15 an hour minimum wage hike is too high for the state's businesses. Perhaps he could be clued in about the needs of other West Virginians before he votes. A little shiv stuck in at the end by Barbara Keppel. So, now on to another of Biden's, I don't know if this one was a broken promise. I think he did promise to straighten out the post office. So here is what's going on at the post office, with the post office, I should say. This one's from Common Dreams. And It was written by Jake Johnson, not surprising. From today, quote, "It's not up to him," unquote, respond critics, as DeJoy says he plans to remain Postmaster General for a, quote, long time. And this is classified as an update. It said, Postmaster General Louis DeJoy said during a House Oversight Committee hearing Wednesday that he intends to remain in his role, quote, for a long time, unquote, and added, quote, "Get used to me," unquote. Evidently, he was trying to echo another Louis, specifically Louis XIV of France. But critics were quick to note how long DeJoy remains Postmaster General is ultimately up to the Postal Service Board of Governors, which is composed of up to 9 Senate-confirmed officials who have the authority to remove and replace DeJoy. The Postmaster General does not serve a fixed term. Several congressional Democrats have urged Biden to fire every sitting member of the Board of Governors for their complicity in DeJoy's sweeping assault on postal operations and fill the board with officials willing to remove the Postmaster General. The president also has the option of filling existing vacancies on the board to give Democrats a majority and the votes needed to oust DeJoy. The ACLU is among the organizations urging Biden and Democratic senators to do just that. "It's not up to him," said Ari Berman of Mother Jones, who tweeted in response to DeJoy's comments, which came as he attempted to defend the significant decline in Postal Service performance since he took charge last year and implemented major operational changes. He said, quote, "Biden can appoint 3 to 4 new USPS board members, giving them as a majority that can oust DeJoy." He rejects the notion he's a political appointee and plans to stay in his role, quote, "for a long time," unquote. DeJoy is daring Senate Democrats to do something about him, said Robert Cruikshank, campaign director at advocacy group Demand Progress. And earlier, members of the House Oversight Committee, including Representatives Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Katie Porter, Rashida Tlaib, and other prominent progressives, are set Wednesday morning to question Postmaster General Louis DeJoy and other witnesses on potential legislative changes to the U.S. Postal Service, which has seen its performance fall dramatically since DeJoy took charge of the agency last year. The hearing, scheduled to begin at 10 a.m. ET, comes as President Joe Biden is facing growing calls to pave the way for DeJoy's removal by replacing the entire USPS board of operational changes, Board of Governors, which defended the Postmaster General last year as he implemented sweeping operational changes that Democratic lawmakers and other critics described as intentional sabotage of the popular government institution. But DeJoy is reportedly planning to roll out an additional slate of policy changes that would further slow mail delivery and hike prices for consumers and businesses. Also set to testify during the hearing are USPS Board of Governors Chair Ron Bloom, Postal Service Inspector General Tammy Whitcomb, American Postal Workers Union President Marka Diamonstein, and others. And then there's a Watch Live there, which is, I don't know if it still works since that was no longer live, but I'm not going to play it anyway. I don't know quite what happened at the hearing, but I suspect that Mr. Joy got a real good going over from Katie and Ocasio-Cortez and other members of the committee. But there is further mention of Mr. DeJoy in a column from Dave Dayen today, which we will now check out. If I can get this going, if I quit hitting the wrong button. Here's the right button. Top House Democrats working with Louis DeJoy on reform legislation for some reason. Top House Democrat. That Top House Democrat is Carolyn Maloney. And this is by David Dayen on February 24th, who also has some news of Neera Tanden. And we'll go on. Representative Carolyn Maloney is more concerned with postal reform legislation than the saboteur inside the Postal Service, as the caption. And if you're reading this Wednesday morning, the House Oversight Committee is taking testimony from Postmaster General Louis DeJoy, Postal Service Board of Governors Chair Ron Bloom, and other stakeholders on the future of the post office. As someone who has tried to put 3 holds on my mail in the last 2 months without success, I have a personal interest in the matter. Amazingly, DeJoy still has a job, despite slow delivery times that have persisted, not just after the election, but after the holiday rush. Again, as someone who just got business cards delivered to my house in the last week, I have a personal interest. Union officials are pointing to the pandemic and thousands of postal workers under quarantine. That's an argument to get them vaccinated as essential workers. But of course, the mail was being delivered decently enough after the pandemic, but before DeJoy was installed over the summer and began changing procedures. But DeJoy remains in place because only the Board of Governors can fire him. And with 3 vacancies on the board, it remains under Republican control, with all of its members nominated by Donald Trump. Biden could fill the 3 vacancies and shift the balance of power on the board, or he could fire the entire board for cause and start over, or maybe fire everyone but Ron Bloom, a token progressive on a board that must be bipartisan, and let him handle the Postmaster General position. Either way, that's what it would take to dump DeJoy. Not much. That's low-hanging fruit. Why doesn't Biden do that tomorrow and gain some points with the American people? How about it, Joe? How about it, Union Man Joe? Do something for the Postal Workers Union. Fire DeJoy. They hate him. But a disturbing piece from CNN suggests that Carolyn Maloney, Democrat of New York, who is chairing the Oversight Committee hearing, is cautioning against firing DeJoy in the hopes that she can get his support for a bipartisan reform bill. You won't want to hear what I have to say about that, because I want to restrict the number of obscenities that I release on this show. Carolyn Maloney needs to resign tomorrow. We'll cope with the loss of a Democratic seat. What an idiot. Anyway, Maloney's colleague, Representative Jerry Connolly, a Democrat of Virginia, who runs the Oversight Subcommittee that includes the Postal Service in its jurisdiction, wants DeJoy gone. Why doesn't Carolyn Maloney resign and let Jerry Connolly take over the seat? The idea that you need DeJoy's help, I don't really want Jerry Connolly to take over the seat. Jerry Connolly's a big supporter of the TPP. We don't need that. The idea that you need the DeJoy's help to get a bill that removes financial hindrances and puts the agency on solid financial footing is unfounded. The pre-funding requirement is unpopular, and I'd be hard-pressed to name a single Democrat who would object to removing it, not to mention several Republicans. Quote, "We will not be delayed or deterred from our North Star of putting the Postal Service on solid financial footing for years to come," unquote. The Postal Service should be reformed by making it once again a cabinet position as it once was, and putting it within the regular federal sphere so it can be the benefit of monetary sovereignty at the federal level. It should not be a self-sustaining agency. It is a service for the American people. And it should be handled as a public agency giving people an alternative to FedEx and to UPS and the other private circuses that have taken over a lot of this sphere. Let the Postal Service drive them out of business for a change. Jesus. And Maloney said that in her opening statement of the hearing. What does that have to do with retaining Joy? The problem with DeJoy is that he's sabotaging the Postal Service with his management tactics. His 10-year plan includes higher prices and slower delivery. I don't see how that changes if the USPS has more money. DeJoy has already failed in his obligations, and the idea that he brings along Republicans to a reform bill is dubious. And by the way, Dave Dayen, why aren't you advocating for the return of the Postal Service into the cabinet and into the executive branch where it has always belonged? Jesus. Every day of delay is critical. The Postal Service just signed a 10-year contract for new vehicles, which, yes, are adorable. But some of the 165,000 vehicles will be fully electric, with others gas powered. This is in direct contradiction to President Biden's executive order to fully electrify the government vehicle fleet. Why is this being allowed to stand? DeJoy said in his opening statement that he would, quote, "see if our electric vehicle goals can be accelerated." Screw him. Get rid of him. He is awful. Biden has said almost nothing about DeJoy while in office, with his administration only promising to work, quote, "work as quickly as possible to fill board vacancies." You've been in office a month. What's the big deal about filling board vacancies? I'll volunteer. You can give me one of the board vacancies. I'll see to it DeJoy is fired. Do it quick. Maybe work quicker and give Maloney a call on this. Working with DeJoy like he's a normal public official is really dumb. It's another very politically dumb thing. Just like your attempt to get Neera Tanden into the cabinet. Dave goes on to talk about Neera Tanden. The tweets get you every time. He says, the Senate Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee has canceled the hearing scheduled for today to vote on Neera Tanden's nomination for Director of the Office of Management and Budget for the fabled OMB, once was headed up by David Stockman. By the way, he would probably make a better head of OMB than Neera Tanden. The Senate budget, he was Ronald Reagan's head of OMB. God. The Senate Budget Committee, which also has jurisdiction, canceled their hearing as well. In Washington speak, that basically means it's over. There's no reason for senators to take votes on a nominee that doesn't have enough support to be confirmed. Unless Biden manages to turn around Joe Manchin or one Republican, Tandon will not be running OMB, and there likely won't be a vote but a withdrawal. There's a TikTok on how the White House botched the nomination, but it's probably too narrative friendly. I don't think it took long for the administration to realize this was going to be a problem nomination. Pretty much every new president loses a cabinet nominee. I'm not saying Tandon was a sacrificial lamb, and frankly, mean tweets shouldn't sink anybody. There are plenty of other reasons Tandon wasn't the best choice, but the possibility of a problem was pretty well understood early on. The sense that this was a Ron Klain special could be correct, but his belief in bulldozing Tandon through wasn't a universal belief. It's not for nothing there was already a pool of replacements already within minutes of Manchin's announcement. We have reported that Gene Sperling is a likely candidate, hinting that his backup had been in place for a while. Sperling is a Clinton-Obama expat who has drifted left over the years. His latest book on the dignity of work is quite a progressive. Ann O'Leary, who most recently was chief of staff to California Governor Gavin Newsom, is also on the short list. Don't take her. She has been a longstanding champion of paid family leave. Still don't take her. That's not enough. House Democrats, particularly the Congressional Black Caucus, are pushing Shalanda Young, already nominated as the deputy OMB director. The first two are more likely. Not with Biden. He could well go to Shalanda Young on an identity politics basis. If Gene Sperling has gone progressive, he'd be the best one in that spot. He's the one with the most experience. He's extremely bright. If he's drifted left and is talking about the dignity of work, he'll likely be a supporter of the job guarantee. I doubt Shalanda Young would be, but I might be wrong about that. But historically, the Congressional Black Caucus doesn't support real good candidates. They're too tied into the identity politics of the matter. OMB will be fine, but what of the future of heavy frequency Twitter posters? Yeah, because having nothing to lose, Tandon will probably go back to roasting everybody in sight with her troll army. But we're ready for her. We've been ready for years. She can bring it on. I think they need pet Tandon management. Barney says they need knowledge management. Biden is leaving Amazon workers out in the cold, says Ryan Cooper. Is that a surprise? He doesn't want to leave the Washington Post out in the cold. So he'd rather leave Amazon workers out in the cold. But Ryan has to say, this was today, February 24, 2021, Joe Biden's political persona is pure blue collar. He is always talking up his supposedly hardscrabble roots in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and boasting about his record of supporting labor rights. When he ran for president in 2007, he claimed he had the best pro-union record of any candidate in the Democratic field. In fact, he had the worst. And there's a link to that, by the way, in Ryan's article. And promised in December that he would be, quote, the most pro-union president you've ever seen. Well, that would be something. Why doesn't he get on the strike line with the Amazon workers in Alabama if he's going to be the most pro-union president we've ever seen? If I recall correctly, Eleanor Roosevelt got on the union strike line with strikers during the 1930s. Biden has taken some reasonably encouraging pro-labor steps since becoming president. Almost immediately, he fired the entire board of Trump appointees on the Federal Service Impasses Panel, which oversees the unions of federal workers. He later fired the two top members of the NLRB and has nominated a union attorney to become the agency's general counsel. Both moves were cheered by unions. But now, when it comes to one of the most high-stakes union drives in years, the ongoing union election at an Amazon warehouse in Alabama, Biden has said nothing in support. Jill, where are you? Aren't you a member of the teachers union? Here, we have the prospect of organizing one of the most brutally anti-worker firms in the country and possibly beginning to reverse the long decline in private sector unionization, as Biden claims to want, and the president is AWOL. It's a maddening decision. A maddening decision. A simple statement of support would be enormously helpful to the Amazon organizers. It would signal that the vast power of the federal government stands behind them, simultaneously giving them confidence and demoralizing the bosses. Yeah, demoralize Bezos. When Franklin Roosevelt was president, union organizers knew that the state would force bosses to obey labor laws and collective bargaining agreements, even if it required literally sending in the troops, federal troops. Yeah, that's what Roosevelt did on a number of occasions. Sent in troops to take over the Ford plant. As a result, there were a lot more unions. Conversely, then, when Ronald Reagan destroyed the air traffic control unions in 1981, private bosses around the country took this as permission to launch aggressive union-busting efforts, figuring correctly that Reagan would let them push the legal envelope. It's not hard to imagine why Biden isn't doing this. The most obvious reason is corruption. Amazon is one of the richest and most powerful companies in the world, and therefore a juicy prospect for post office jobs and bribes for Biden and his staffers. Witness former Obama administration Secretary Jay Carney, who is now a senior vice president at Amazon. As Vice reported last year, he and other Amazon brass personally coordinated a smear campaign against warehouse worker Christian Smalls. Well, after all, people who work for the Obama administration are usually experts at smear campaigns who had tried to organize workers to get better protections from the pandemic. Chris Smalls. The reason a company like Amazon hires former Democratic Party elites is connections. Sure enough, Carney was Biden's communications director early in the Obama years and diligently courted Biden's presidential campaign in 2020 with huge donations and outreach. No doubt Amazon executives hope that massive salary he's been collecting is going to pay off in spades now. But there's also a cultural, ideological factor at work. The neoliberal faction that ruled the Democratic Party from the late 1970s through 2016, at least 46, well, not 46 years, like at least 35 years, viewed big corporations with credulous amiability, especially high-tech ones. Google was practically its own branch of government during the Obama years. That's related to corruption too, but it's also tied up with the fading embers of 1990s tech utopianism when people thought computers and the internet would usher in a new age of global peace and understanding. My, how things have changed in 20 years. Given that the opposite happened, big tech barons proved to be just as monstrous as their oligarch forebears from the first Gilded Age, if not worse. That attitude is fading fast, but it can still be seen here and there, as in Biden's apparent wish to get Amazon involved in the COVID-19 vaccine rollout for some reason. Still, however surprising Biden's silence might be given his record, letting the Amazon organizers go it alone is political malpractice. It is breaking a campaign of promise and ignoring a winning issue. Nearly two-thirds of Americans approve of labor unions, up 17 points in the last decade. Donald Trump and other right-wing pseudo-populists like Senator Josh Hawley, Republican Missouri, have gotten a lot of mileage out of pretending to support workers while doing almost nothing to help them in concrete terms, and continuing to rake in huge donations from the oligarch class. This is one reason why Trump did so well among union workers, though culture war, red meat played a part as well. Biden coming out hard for an Amazon union would pin those Republicans between their donors and a substantial portion of their base. And should the union vote succeed, Democrats would have a concrete example of why the working class should vote for them. Back when New Dealers were passing tons of labor legislation and supporting strikes against corporate bosses, the fraction of private sector workers in a union was roughly 5 times as large as it is today, and most of them voted for Democrats in election after election, I might add. One doesn't even have to take a bitterly anti-Amazon line to believe the company's workers ought to get decent labor conditions and a share of the company's gigantic profits. If Jeff Bezos is worth $186 billion, then surely a warehouse worker can get a bathroom and rest breaks, guaranteed shifts, and $15 an hour. At any rate, this won't be the last time labor rights come up in the Biden administration. The PRO Act, P-R-O Act, a sweeping bill that would be the biggest reform of labor law since 1935, has passed the House already, and Biden says he supports it. Whether he pushes his moderate Democratic colleagues in the Senate to reform the filibuster and pass the law will be the real test for his labor legacy. But so far, the prospects are not promising, says Ryan. So what about the road to Trump? The road to Trump, my friends, is paved with broken promises. What promises are broken? The promise with respect to Yemen, the promise with respect to the minimum wage, the promise with respect to the stimulus checks, the promises that Democrats made during the campaigns, if not Biden, all over the country about forgiveness of student debt. Even if Biden himself didn't make those promises, the Democratic Party as a whole did. And they won't be able to get off the hook. If the student debtors are still there in 2022, you can count on them to stay home. You can count on them maybe even to vote for Trump. If Trump runs on canceling student debt as soon as he gets into office, you don't think Trump will do that? Think again. Think again. He was stupid enough not to do it before the last election. But will he be stupid enough not to do it again? Trump could have canceled that debt. What if he had canceled that debt the week before the election? You think Trump wouldn't have won? That wouldn't have swung the relatively few votes he would have needed to get an electoral college majority? That's all it would take if Trump were running in 2024 against Biden or Harris. That's all it would take for him to win, is to promise that he would forgive all the student debt and then do it when he got into office. That's it. And, of course, Biden's union promises as well. The road to Trump is paved with Biden's broken promises. He's only a month into his presidency. He's breaking these promises left and right. He's got to stop breaking the promises. He's got to keep his commitments. It's bad enough that he's denying people Medicare for all. There's also the question of jobs. His favorite economist on the Council of Economic Advisors, his previous chief economics advisor, Jared Bernstein, wrote a book with Dean Baker on the job guarantee. People who sat on the unity committees that were formed after Bernie Sanders dropped out advocated for the job guarantee and told Biden how great a job guarantee would be. A job guarantee program set at a living wage, cost adjusted, for all the areas of the United States, starting at $15 an hour, let's say for the low wage, for the lowest wage in the United States, and cost adjusted all across the United States. That would set a de facto minimum wage, whether one passed now or not. Biden has got to start satisfying not only the promises he made, but also the hopes and wishes of the American people. He's got to pay what the American people want. The agenda should be clear, and it is not what he is doing. He's got to stop, or Trump will get back into power, and it will be on Biden's head. Because he is acting like a stupid fool. He should already be a hero to the American people if he had done all that he could do. All he specializes in is saying no and giving excuses why he can't do things. And all the excuses are BS. They're BS. We know they're BS. Every one of them is BS. Like Carolyn Maloney says, she needs the joy there because he'll get bipartisan support. Don't need bipartisan support. Don't need bipartisan support. Guess what? Bringing the post office back into the cabinet would have budgetary effects. It could be done as part of the reconciliation bill. Wrap it into the reconciliation bill. Make the position of Postmaster General a cabinet position again. And then fire DeJoy on the spot. That's the way to do it. Get rid of this nonsense of a self-sufficient post office. Who needs it? We don't need a self-sufficient post office. The federal government is a monetary sovereign. It can support the post office up to infinity. We never had slow mail when it was a patronage position. The mails were always there. They were always there. This is nonsense. Okay, that's all for now, folks. I'm taking your comments. Getting back to your comments. Hope you enjoyed this one. I enjoyed it. Okay. Here we go. Jim Bird says, hey all. Hi, Jim. Joy says, hello, Bonnie.
Hello.
Kay says, shared. Evelina says, political expediency. Colombia wanted to show how terrible Maduro was. Right now, they're deporting hundreds, of Venezuelans. Well, hundreds of Venezuelans is not the millions of Venezuelans they took in, is it? Right? And Venezuela has a population of 5 million Colombians in a small country. That is a lot. Yeah, what's the population, okay, of Venezuela? It's about 27 million, isn't it? Something like that, Evelina. It's real handy. I mean, I can look it up handy. It's on the Worldometer site. I just got to get to Venezuela. They're pretty far down the list. Their population is 28,383,225. Almost as big as Colombia. So that is a lot. Yeah, the Venezuelans are more generous than the Colombians, right? Because they accepted 5 million Colombians. Why did the 5 million Colombians go to Venezuela? Probably because the Venezuelan government is doing a better job than the Colombian government, right? So the rich people probably went to Colombia and the poor people went to Venezuela, right? Isn't that what happened? Steve Gonzo says the recent judgment does not prevent JB from halting deportations. I know it doesn't. Evelina says not just about deportations. It's about putting migrants in detention facilities. Just opened up a place for children in Texas. She says, children, capitalized in Texas. Awful. Thank you, Evelina. I know. Dia says, off for tonight. The NRA is suing Letitia James, citing she's charging in prosecution of vengeance. She's our only hope to stifle Trump and his fascism. I don't know if she's our only hope, but she's certainly one of our best hopes. And I don't think that any suit they have against her is going to succeed. They're obviously suing her because she's trying to take away their corporate charter. She's trying to take away their corporate charter and dissolve them. I mean, it may be a prosecution of vengeance, but that's not the issue. Are they guilty of what she's charging them with? If they are, them suing her for a prosecution of vengeance is not going to succeed. Kay says, Evelina, I heard a new one in Florida too. Dia Swift says, typo, charging and prosecuting out of vengeance. Yeah, I got that, Dia. Evelina says, betting on or Venezuelan or Cuban refugees they put in detention centers, such BS. Kay says, no one said who was in them yet. They're mostly Central American and Haitian, Evelina said. Evelina said, I'm just guessing. And Lana Dell says, hi, Dia. And Dia says, hi, lovely Lana. Nice, I made it again. Kay says, Evelina Pont, the story he gave was to be able to follow virus guidelines to keep them safer. Steve says, massive protests in Haiti, I know. Joy says, we need a nuclear deal. Cancel student debt up to $50,000. Cancel all the student debt, all of it. The federal government shouldn't be in the student debt business anymore. It's all a drama. They are actors. We are the foolish audience. I've had it. Dia says, U.S. Supreme Court weighs scope of police hour to enter homes without a warrant. Reuters. What kind of police power do they have to enter homes without a search warrant? Without an arrest warrant or a search warrant? Are they crazy? They're crazy. This Supreme Court, the members of this Supreme Court have to be impeached. They do. They're awful. Evelyn says, in crowded detention centers, I don't know, okay. Kay says, just telling you what he said. Dia says, yay, run, AOC, run. Joy says, I don't have such faith in any of them. Joy says, you know we need to clean the slate. And she says, a revolution. Yes. And Kay says, what is going on in Haiti? Why are people protesting there? Because they're starving and because the dictatorship is looting. Evelina says dictatorship. Padilla says Biden will be history in 24. Could be. Joy says get their addresses. Hang the rope around the tree branch. Steve says Biden lifts Trump era ban blocking legal immigration to the U.S. Yes, he did that. I know. But Manchin has committed to a no vote for Nero Tandan. Nero Tandan. Evelina says a lot of people got citizenship the last 4 years, only they weren't Central American. Laugh out loud. Kay says Bernie is still working on the Wage Act. He was on Hartman and Hayes' show today. I know he is. Evelina says it wasn't a real ban. Joe, why do we talk it to death? Nothing will change. We talk it to death because we believe public pressure can do something. We still believe it can do something, even if it's only to get people really, really up and really, really disappointed, so they go over to the People's Party. Steve says, the Muslim ban. Evelina says, good old Bernie keeps fighting for stuff. That's great. It is. Joe, what can we do besides struggle for years? Struggle for years and then win. That's what, Joy. We can win. You know the old story. How's that little Gandhi thing go again? First they make fun of you, then they get angry at you, then they do something, and then you win. Well, I've forgotten that. See, a senior moment. That's one you never forget, right? Steve Gonzo says, not for Europeans. And Lana says, I fear Dr. Joe is right. These probably will be defeated in the next midterm, 2024. It's very sad because it's the product of stupidity and stubbornness and arrogance and refusal to learn. These people were supposed to have learned something from Obama's defeat in 2010. Really, the Democratic Party's defeat in 2010. But it was Obama's defeat in 2010 because he didn't get done what he needed to get done. Biden needs to get done what he needs to get done. We know what it is. He's got to go to Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema and say, look, you stand or fall with me. If I lose, do you think you're going to win in 2024? Do you think you're going to win in 2024? If we lose the midterms in 2022, do you think you're going to win in 2024? Because I can tell you now, you won't. So you need to stick with me and help me get done what I need to get done to win in 2024. Can you say, look, I don't know if I'm going to run again, but Kamala isn't going to win in 2024 if we don't keep our promises, if we don't do what the American people need now. You're standing in the way. Get on the train. Biden's got to tell them that. He can get them to do what he wants to do. Joy says revolution, and then she says good night at 9:37. Dia says, my YouTube is cutting off a lot tonight. Yours too? I don't know. I'm not watching this on YouTube. I can just see it on the interface I have from StreamYard. And that doesn't show whether it's cutting on and off YouTube. I don't know why it would cut on and off, but from the standpoint of StreamYard, everything is copacetic. Evelina says, my friend in New York says a lot of Brits, French, and from the caucuses new in town. Okay.
We need yellow jackets.
Evelina says, and working. Evelina says it was a selective ban. Sorry, honey.
Maybe we need yellow jackets here.
Maybe we need the yellow jackets. Yes. The yellow vests.
That's it.
Yes. If a $15 an hour gets approved, will corporations and businesses exploit everything by raising prices, as in rent, okay, and groceries? I seriously doubt that. I mean, I think the landlords will try, but if there's no shortage of housing in the areas they're operating in, they're not going to get away with that. Okay. As for groceries, there don't seem to be any food shortages, so it seems to me the food stores are going to adjust by just keeping people supplied and making more money. I mean, they're making money on the prices as it is now. It's not like the food stores are losing money. Evelina says, the austerity bird, laugh out loud. Is it a vulture? Sure is a vulture. And Steve says, Maryland and California recently moved forward with help for the poor, the jobless, small business, and those needing childcare. New Mexico and Pennsylvania funneling grants directly to cash-starved businesses. North Carolina's governor wants additional state aid for such things as bonus pay for teachers and boosting the rural internet speeds. Yep. Kay says, yes, it is. Evelina Diaz says, austerity bird must be a vulture capitalist. Yes, a vulture hedge funder. And Evelina says, the Bezos can kiss my butt, laugh out loud. Diaz says, every legislation, rules, and regulations ought to compress us into neo-feudal slaves. Bernie said today he's having a meeting on Walmart and other huge companies that underpaid the employees, that the employees have to seek help from the federal government.
Remember when they had the yellow ribbons? Maybe we should have red ribbons for $15.
That's not a good idea. It should be yellow ribbons for $15, or yellow ribbons for a living wage, actually.
Okay.
A living wage. Don't mention $15. It's too low. It's not a living wage.
Okay.
I mean, that's the lie. It's not a living wage. May have been a living wage when the campaign first started in 2011, but it's not a living wage in 2020.
Okay.
Not anymore. Evelina said, kiss S and Bezo. Lana says, mine is not cutting out at all so far. Probably local weather conditions. And Steve Gonzo says at Aaron J. Mate, the warning is back, but it's backfiring, going viral. Reuters, BBC, and Bellingcat participated and covered by UK Foreign Office funded programs to weaken Russia, leaked docs reveal. But these materials may have been obtained through hacking. Maybe, but if they were obtained through hacking, that doesn't mean the gray zone did the hacking. Evelina said, whistleblowers, I seriously doubt that the gray zoners know how to hack. Kay says, Katie Porter gave him hell today. Laugh out loud. Love her. Good for Katie. She's really good. And McDonald's collects strategic intelligence on workers advocating for a $15 an hour minimum wage, including how and where will $15 attack the brand, like Amazon. Yep, they'll do that. Evelina says the joy is bad for morale. He's bad for their salaries too. He doesn't want to raise their salaries. He wants to hold it down. Balana says, yeah, Carolyn Maloney, what the hell? What is she doing still there? She is She is just an albatross hanging around the neck of the Democratic Party. Another albatross. She still thinks it's the 1990s. Steve Gonzo says, no one can slow walk like Biden. No one can sleepwalk like Biden. Kay says, I checked out Fault Lines this AM. Pretty good. Yeah, Fault Lines is pretty good. Dia says, thanks for your reply, Lana. Evelina said, no one could smooth talk like Obama. Laugh out loud. Yeah, Biden certainly can't. And Dia says, the joy is we'll still be instrumental in hindering mail-in voting if fascist Trump runs in 24. Not only that, he's delaying stimulus checks to people. He's delaying stimulus checks to people. There are still people who have not gotten their stimulus checks. I'm very sorry. They're not all out. That is why he was assigned that post. He's a pawn on a dictatorship mission. Evelina says, Dr. Joe for board seat. Yeah. Yeah, the GOP is trying to dismantle the Voting Rights Act. You better believe they're trying to oust up a corporate uber alles apartheid dictatorship. Never get comfortable as long as they are a party. Yeah, they're fascists. Barbara Wernick says, if Biden allows the Joy to destroy the USPS, it's absolutely a bipartisan plan to privatize the post office. It is. I mean, Biden's crazy. One of the most unpopular things about the Trump administration was what the Joy did to the post office and the damage he did to the election also with the mail-in votes. I'm sure that cost Biden votes. Evelina says, yeah. Dia says, typo, trying to set up a corporate dictatorship. Kay says, I agree with Bonnie. Barbara says, whoa, get on the line with workers. Steve says, Andy Biggs ludicrously faulted the recent slowdown in post office deliveries on the Antifa, yeah, and be assured, claiming that destruction of property during last year's summer protests was the actual cost of current USPS issues. That's really, I shouldn't be laughing. That's a really big lie. That's a terrible big lie. Evelina says, yeah, Jill, show us where your true loyalties lay. Lie. It's lie, Evelina, lie. It's actually spelled the same way as lie. Bernie is sending food and his support even though he is too busy to be there right now. Evelina says, ridiculous. Food and support is good, but he should take a flight down there anyway and stand online with them. He should. Evelina says, ridiculous. Dia says, I won't order from Amazon. And Lana says, the Joy has the wrong name. Dia says, laugh out loud. Yep, it should be the Downer. Yeah, he has the wrong name. In French, it means of joy. But he is of rage. We should change his name to Derage. Steve Gonzo said, maybe we should start a GoFundMe for our government. Yes, the GoFundMe for our government has already been started. It's called Overt Congressional Financing. And it's the way the government should do things to get as much money as it ever needs so that it doesn't have to float any more future tax credit instruments. Those things we now call debt instruments. They're not really debt instruments. What they are is they're like CDs. They're future tax credit instruments. Okay, what you do is you give a CD to the bank and you don't have those tax credits anymore because you've given it to the bank for a certain period of time. And the bank pays interest on those the future tax credits that you deposited there at the end of the CD period, they return you the future tax credits plus the interest for the future tax credits. So you get enhanced tax credits. It's future tax credits. So let's call it future tax credits. Okay, and the national debt is really the national future tax credits. Not quite. It's the national future tax credits minus the interest that will fall due on those tax credits, future tax credits. D.S. Swift says Trump is speaking at CPAC and coming back on Facebook in May. He's still a danger. I know. Dems are pretty much useless under Biden. Hopes for a people's party. Politically stupid and morally wrong. Can't break promises. Trump has over 88 million followers on Twitter. They love the tyrant. And now they get to play victim. I'm sure not all 88 million followers of Trump are Trumpists. They're because he only got 75 million votes, right? Or 74 million votes, okay, whatever it was, right? So obviously, all 88 million are not his followers. Probably half of them are people who hate him. Biden has not mentioned Social Security expansion since seniors helped to elect him either. Sherrod Brown has been on top of that, though, thankfully. Yeah, I haven't heard him mention Social Security expansion. And Lana says, ugh, Trump. And Dia says, COVID is dangerously, resistantly mutating. There may not be many healthy workers by 24. I don't know if it's so dangerous. It is said that some of the vaccines, I think it was Johnson & Johnson, in tests in Brazil and South Africa, they've been shown to be very effective against the new strains that are there in both of those countries. Dia says it will be on our head. Biden will be hiding while we will suffer under Trump fascism. Evelina says it's more like 35 million, okay, in Venezuela. And she says only 28 million. Well, that's what the Worldometer site says. It might be wrong. And Lana says, wasn't the Yellow Jackets a band? Yeah, they probably were a band. But the Yellow Vests, they were not a band. Okay, says, yes, we do some Yellow Vests here, Bonnie. Rob says, hey, Yoda, hey, Rob. Dia says, I read a Virginia Democrat told Cruz off today. Sweet. AOC has been telling Cruz off all week, right? Dia says, it should be green ribbons for a living wage so it can grow. Good idea, Dia. Green ribbons for a living wage. Right. Bezo in Spanish is a kiss. Why I said Bezos could kiss my butt, Dr. Joe. Okay, thank you, Bezo. And Evelina says Jill's loyalty lies with her husband. Yeah, I think it does. After so many years, I suspect it does. Okay, folks. That's about it for tonight. I'll be back again tomorrow. Unfortunately, Carmen won't be here. But I'm sure the Hulk will come out every once in a while anyway. So good night. Have a good night. Have a wonderful day tomorrow. And get angry when it deserves anger.
Stay well.
And stay well, Bonnie says, yes. Everybody stay well. We're coming up on 2 weeks since we had our second shot. Evelina says, thank you for another great discussion. Love you all, and we love you, Kay. Evelina says, great show. Good night, everyone. Thank you, Evelina. I appreciate it. Lana says good night. Hey, Lana, you off work yet? Or are you still working? Evelina says, great show. Good night, everyone. Good night. Good night.